Hey everybody! It's been an interesting week for Lost Ark because we got Clown released. So I was busy doing a lot of that since the reset. But I wanted to make a fun video today, and it relates to a really interesting video that Lost Ark content creator Kanon put out. He had a really fun panel where other Lost Ark creators hopped on and talked about a tier list for classes. And in that conversation, they had a section on Arcana, of course, since it's one of the playable classes of the West. And I thought they brought up some really interesting points that I'd like to elaborate on, and I'd like to provide some more context for. So, without further ado, what I'd like to do today is listen to a little bit of what they have to say, and then give you my thoughts on what their perspective is, and maybe even kind of clarify some of the things that were brought up in the conversation. So if you guys want to watch the full video, make sure you go to Kanon's channel and watch that. The link will be in my description here if you want a direct access to that video, but please support them. And let's jump right in. Okay, so here we are in the middle of the video.
Dude, there's some good Arcanas, and I'm not one of them. I made this class.
Me too.
I was playing it. Dude, high investment. You have to do your a lot of tripods, a lot of gems.
Yes.
A lot of memorization stuff. Oh my goodness, there's so much to do.
Yeah.
Even like both engraved, like another engraving, right? You just like pull Emperor card stuff. It's really, really good for Chaos Dungeon.
Oh,
True.
it's so
This
fun
class
for
is,
chaos.
yeah, it's fun pulling those Emperor cards back to back to back. It has, you have your crit synergy and stuff like that. It's very, very squishy. A really good player could pop off with this, like G-Dow, he's like an absolute gamer god. I'm kind of scared to rank this. I'll probably put a B tier. I'll probably put a B tier right now.
High B tier or low B tier?
Interesting.
High B tier.
Interesting perspective.
Low B tier. Lowest on the list. Yeah.
Oh wow.
I think right now it's hard to see, but I think right now in B tier they have Sharpshooter and Shadowhunter.
Do you know the fight Maneth on our version? Basically it's where you get like 50 people from your guild and you fight this boss, and it generally dies in like 8 seconds, and you have like 3 seconds to walk to the fight. So Igniter Sorks are like king on that boss, but we found out that Arcana rotation with Cole and whatever the other card is
Probably
is
Judgment.
Wheel of Fortune.
Could be Wheel of Fortune.
Yeah, it's higher
Probably
than
Judgment.
any burst that an Igniter Sword can put out. And when I learned that, I was like, wait, this class seems kind of busted. But it's RNG, and I heard its rotation in PvE is very RNG as well.
It is.
So I'm not really sure how to feel about that. That's one of the
Not really
reasons I
true.
never
This is
tried
one
out
of the
the
big
class.
things that I want to talk about
just based
today.
on the fact that it's RNG damage, I would probably put it in B. But
Gotcha. So you'd have it. Would you have it a high B or low B?
well, I definitely think it's probably better than Sharpshooter, but
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Okay, gotcha. So I play an Arcana. I've been learning. I've been talking a little bit to Jadao about it, and it's one of my favorite classes. I'm terrible at it because I'm new to the class, but I'm pretty familiar with the damage potential. If we are talking about like potential damage, like the burst windows are definitely S tier if all the stars will line up. You have your cards everywhere.
Yeah,
but that's
if you have the
exactly
right
issue
cards,
with
burst window
class
is
that
really good.
It's very RNG based depending on the cards that you get, right?
Disagree.
My personal opinion, I think if you have an Arcana in our region that's 1500 plus, 1490 plus, and they are familiar with the class, very good on the class, and have their gear, I do not see this being lower than an A tier class. I really don't. I would have it at a solid A tier class. It's just very challenging. But if we're taking away the challenging factor of it,
his ranking
that
feels
isn't an issue.
appropriate.
Just like how we were talking about Deadeye. Well, it's difficult to play, but we're talking about a master of the class. The only thing that cucks it is the RNG when it comes to Arcana with the cards, right? So I personally really think that it should be in the A tier. But yeah, we're gonna have to place it somewhere.
I think it's too RNG to be an A tier, right?
Yeah, that's a fair point.
That's
a
a
argument with it, yeah.
That's a fair argument. Yeah.
What Dadmons just said there, I think, is a big point. And it seems like the general consensus in this conversation is that Arcana is hampered by its RNG elements.
If
Not
the
what
RNG
builds are
lines
playing,
up,
right, but
it's
yeah.
like
Yeah, it's scary if the RNG lines up, and you'll notice a lot of Empress it's not like you're always cycling cards too, right? Like once you get the cards that you want, sometimes you'll hold on to them as well. So, but I get what you're saying, Mods, and what you're saying is not wrong. So we're gonna have to place this somewhere where you said both of you guys at the top, you guys said B tier, right?
Above sharpshooter for sure.
Above sharpshooter. Are you good
That's
with
what I
above
said.
sharpshooter? Yeah.
That's
what
what
would
they
you?
said. That's
What
what
would
they
you? Where
said.
would you put it, Steve C? Would
I
you
have
put it
no
above
idea.
sharpshooter?
I literally have no idea.
Okay. Okay.
I'll let you know right now. I don't have a sharpshooter instead of a goddamn shadow hunter and a fucking arcana. That's for sure.
Okay.
I don't know if I bring either of those to my goddamn group.
I probably agree with what you said because thinking about it, I think if their cards do line up, it's probably S tier, which
It's
usually
really
doesn't happen.
But
So
right.
maybe the RNG like averages out or something. Maybe
Right.
it'll be A tier. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Pretty accurate. Okay, so I think generally the conversation kind of settled around a lot of concerns over the RNG elements of Arcana and how its damage fluctuates, and then also the high requirements for it to get to the point where it actually performs. I would actually say, obviously, tier lists are kind of just like a whatever thing, but if we're talking about damage output, I think Arcana is one of the higher damage classes in the game, even without considering the RNG factor of how it draws its cards. One of the things that I want to talk about today is really how varied is your damage output and why there's more nuance to the conversation for RNG as it relates to the Arcana class and how it actually affects your gameplay. As a general summary, the two things that I want to go over is first, I want to show you guys just exactly how consistent Arcana damage is by going into Trixion. It's more consistent than you would think. Over several 2-minute parses, I can get fairly similar DPS numbers for all of them. And so it's not that the RNG element for Arcana is for its overall damage. I think it consistently does high damage. But there are elements to the class that are random. And when these situations show up, they show up in different scenarios that relate to burst or relate to you being able to handle certain scenarios in raids. Okay, so here we are in Trixion. And the first thing that I want to show you guys is dispelling the myth that Arcana's damage is very RNG based. Now, there are elements to Arcana that change based on what cards you draw. Sometimes your rotation changes, sometimes the decisions that you have to make change a little bit. However, this doesn't affect its damage output over a period of time. It averages out to be a high performing class. What we're going to do is do a bunch of 2-minute parses. I'm probably going to fast forward or skip some of them just for the sake of the length of the video, but I might talk through the first one or so. But I'll show you that each of my rotations are going to end up with about the same DPS. Now I'm doing this at 1490 with relic accessories, right? We have the 5x3 Empress Adrenaline 2, right? Fairly standard Arcana build. Specialization is a little bit on the lower side, but here we go. We're going to do a parse. So we're going to start out. Get 4 stacks, activate our awakening. Didn't crit. And if all things go well, this should even out at about 3 million. 3 million or so, and a little bit of change. So some people would say that that was a pretty good draw since we hit Judgment. Probably going to draw cards and return. Save this coal for the next set. Pop coal. I could have used rain there. The garden. Balance is good. Rest of the rotation. 20 seconds left. Really nice cooldowns. 5 seconds left. Get a secret garden. Go. So we ended up at 3.3 million, okay? A few things that I want to say. One of the things that works against this notion that Arcana has RNG DPS is that oftentimes when people say that, they focus on big card draws that have to do with Cull, Judgment, Wheel of Fortune, something like that. What they don't realize is there's a lot that really helps Arcana, especially in the cards like Three-Headed Snake, Balance, Moon. All three of these cards are actually really, really strong as well. Most notably, Moon and Balance actually increase your DPS by quite a large margin, but it's just not as noticeable because people really focus on the high burst potential of Cold Judgment. I would argue that you are the most comfortable in a raid setting when you get Moon and Balance, and as we do some of these rotations, or as you may have paid attention in the previous parts that I just did, when I have Balance activated, it makes my rotation much smoother, and then having Moon combined with Boundless Mana makes for a very, very fast and speedy rotation. So we ended up at 3.3 mil. Let's do a few other rotations and see how they turn out. So as you can see from these pools, the DPS that I got over several 2-minute parses range from 3.3 million to 3.6, which is definitely a range. However, the damage is consistently high parsing, it's consistently good, and I've done a lot of Trixion parses on my Arcana over the months that I've been playing it, and it's pretty consistent. I can tell you for a fact that I would generally just end up evening out at about 3.3, 3.4 mil. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't RNG elements to the class, because obviously you can't control which cards you get when you draw cards. So what is the actual random element to the class? Well, I think there are a few key moments that we have to highlight. The most obvious one, this is the one that people mistakenly point to the most when it comes to Arcana damage, is if you draw cards like Cold and Judgment. Obviously, if you draw these cards back to back, you're going to be doing a ton of damage. The burst potential for the Arcana is really, really high with these cards under its belt. But where it really matters in a fight is if for some reason you need to burst at some moment, whether or not you have these cards ready and available to go, when your support gives you some kind of buff or the boss has a particular moment in time where you need to burst, this can sometimes change how fast you push past phases and how fast you might push a certain aspect of the boss fight in an actual raid. Not a big deal, but it is something to consider that is a random element to Arcana. But don't get it confused, this doesn't mean that Arcana's damage output is random over the course of the fight. It's very consistent, it's just in that small moment for doing burst, it's whether you're doing a lot of burst in that moment, or if you're just having a stable set of DPS over a long period of time. The second thing that I think is random for Arcana is one of its weaknesses, right? If you've ever played Arcana in Legion raids, you'll learn that Arcana is terrible at handling weak adds. So let me give you a few examples. The most notable for the Western players right now is probably the Tentacles phase in Vika's Gate 3. When Arcana has to do Tentacles in Gate 3 Vikas, it is a headache. Not only do you have to be melee range, potentially opening yourself up to getting hit by orbs while you're doing damage to the Tentacles because you have to stack up to 4 and kill them, but if you ever go under the requisite amount of lust gauge to hit the tentacles, you can't even put your stacking skills on the tentacles. Anybody who's played Arcana knows that the fact that you have to stack up and then use your ruin skill and then do enough damage to kill the ad knows that Arcana is very uncomfortable in these phases. If you compare this to something like maybe a gunslinger, where you can just use something like perfect shot or focus shot or something, and you're just going to wipe out multiple tentacles from safe ranges instantly, or even something like a Deathblade, which might be a more fair comparison, where they might have to use something like a Soul Absorber or one Blitz Rush or something like that to wipe out tentacles instantly. Most notably, because Clown recently came out, there's a lot of phases in Clown, especially in Gate 3, where you have to kill ads, either the circus balls or the flame towers, something of that sort, or even in the earlier gates when they have the mini soldiers that come out. It's very uncomfortable for Arcana to do that, because you have to stack up your damage and then use the ruin skill to actually have the payoff happen. These situations can be solved if you have a judgment card. Even balance helps you a ton in these scenarios. When you have Judgment and you're in Tentacles phase of Vicus, it all of a sudden becomes the biggest headache of your life to you can instantly eliminate 3 Tentacles, if not more, depending on how they're spaced, immediately. Because you don't have to do any of your stacking skills. You just use Secret Garden and then Celestial Rain from range, and then use your mobility to get over to another Tentacle, and maybe use Serendipity, and maybe it does a single crit out of its 2 swipes or something like that. That is very RNG. Okay, if you go into an ad phase and you have Judgment, it can trivialize ad phases very, very quickly. But if you don't have it, that becomes a headache. However, again, I would like to reiterate, none of this has anything to do with Arcana's overall damage output. As I demonstrated to you in Trixion, if you're doing your rotation appropriately, if you're drawing your cards consistently, if you're utilizing your cards in the right way, and you're maximizing your opportunity to do damage with these cards, your damage output is going to be consistently high every single time. Arcana is not hampered by RNG. And hopefully, you guys will feel a little bit more informed about the class. Very fun video by Kanon. Really like the perspectives that all the streamers shared. Wanted to give you some additional thoughts and context about the Arcana class for somebody who plays it a lot. Hope you guys enjoyed. Have a good one.